If I could go back and speak to the young man I used to be, I'd tell him not to wait so long to say I love you, not to waste so much time being afraid of his own heart. They say when you're near the end, your life flashes before your eyes. For me, it wasn't a flash, it was a slow replay, frame by frame, sound by sound, smells, touches, laughter, silence. My name is Samuel Pierce. I'm 78 years old, and I've loved one woman my entire life, but I never married her. Not because I didn't want to, not because I couldn't, but because I was a coward when it mattered most. And that's what this story is about. It's not about war or fame or fortune. It's about quiet moments, missed chances, and the way love can haunt you, beautifully and painfully for a lifetime. So if you have someone to love, really love, don't wait for the right words or the perfect time, because time doesn't wait. I was 17 when I met her. It was the spring of 1964, and I had just gotten my first real job as a stock boy at Whitman's General Store down on Harper Street. Back then, I still had a full head of hair and dreams too big for my small town. I thought I'd be a journalist one day, travel the world, write about revolutions, sip coffee in Paris cafes. Then I saw her, and suddenly all I wanted was to stay exactly where I was. Her name was Evelyn Rose. She came in every Saturday morning with her mother to buy fresh bread and raspberry jam. She always wore this pale blue dress with little white buttons that matched the bow in her hair. But what I remember most were her eyes, gray like storm clouds, but gentle like evening rain. She never looked at anyone for too long, except out the window, where the ivy grew wild along the brick. That's how I started calling her the girl by the window, before I ever knew her name. I'd watch her from behind the shelf of canned peaches, pretending to arrange them perfectly, while my heart beat like a drum in my throat. I was too shy to speak to her. I'd never been good with girls. Words came easily on paper, but in person, I was clumsy, quiet, afraid of saying the wrong thing. One morning, she dropped a jar of jam. It shattered at her feet, red and sticky across the tiles. Without thinking, I ran over, knelt down, and helped her pick up the glass. She looked at me for the first time, really looked. "I'm sorry," she whispered, cheeks flushed. "I'm such a mess today." I said something dumb like, "It's okay, happens to everyone." But my hands were shaking. I remember how close her fingers came to mine when we both reached for the same shard. I think time paused just a little. "Thank you. What's your name?" she asked. "Sam," I said. She smiled. "I'm Evelyn." That was the beginning, or at least it could have been. She started saying hi every time she came in. Once, she waited for me to finish wiping down the soda counter just to ask what I was reading. I had The Grapes of Wrath tucked in my apron. She said she loved Steinbeck, too. After that, we talked more. Little things, books, songs on the radio, her plans to go to nursing school. I never said how I felt. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. I kept waiting. The summer came and went. She came in less often, said her mother wasn't well, that she was helping out more at home. One day, she walked in with a boy I didn't recognize. Tall, polished, probably from her church. She introduced him as just a friend, but he wasn't looking at her like a friend. I wanted to tell her right there in the bakery aisle. I wanted to say, "You're all I think about. I don't care about Paris or New York. I just want to know," but I didn't say a word. She left that day with a loaf of rye bread and the boy at her side. I stayed late stocking shelves I'd already stocked. When I walked home, I kicked every stone on the path, cursed myself under my breath. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, she stopped coming in at all. I later heard she moved to Boston to start school. I never got the chance to say goodbye. Never got the chance to say anything real. And I carried that silence with me for years. You see, heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet ache you carry in your chest. Sometimes it's the sound of a girl's footsteps walking away while you stand frozen by fear. That was the first time I learned what regret really felt like. Not sharp, but hollow. I turned 21 in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a mechanic shop with a leaky faucet and a view of nothing but power lines. Evelyn still lived in my head. It's strange how some memories refuse to fade, even when you beg them to. I'd sit by the window most nights, cigarette in one hand, pen in the other, writing letters I never mailed. Dozens of them, maybe more. Dear Evelyn, I saw a girl today who laughed like you. It stopped me cold in the street. Dear Evelyn, do you ever think of that broken jar of jam? Because I do, every time I see raspberries. Dear Evelyn, I never said it, but I should have. But I never had the courage to find her address. Some cowardly part of me said it was too late, that she had probably forgotten all about me, that sending a letter now would be selfish, a disruption to whatever life she had built. So I kept writing and never sending, and life went on, the way life does. I worked odd jobs, factory lines, warehouse shifts, delivery runs. Nothing glamorous, nothing steady, but I always found time to write. Pages of short stories, poems scribbled on napkins, journal entries written like confessions, all of them haunted by the same girl. Then one cold November evening, almost 6 years after I'd last seen her, I ran into her again. It was at the local library, of all places. I was thumbing through a worn copy of Leaves of Grass, flipping absent-mindedly, when a voice beside me said, "That one's my favorite." I turned. There she was, older, softer around the eyes, her hair a bit shorter, but unmistakably Evelyn. My heart forgot how to beat. She blinked at me, recognition dawning like a sunrise. "Sam?" I nodded. I think I smiled. I hope I did. We stepped outside, sat on the concrete steps beneath a dying maple tree, and talked like no time had passed. She was back in town for a few weeks. Her mother had taken a fall and needed help. She had become a nurse, just like she said. Worked nights at a hospital near Boston. Said it was exhausting, but it mattered to her. I told her I'd been writing. She looked at me then with a softness I hadn't seen since that day by the jam aisle. "You always had a way with words," she said. "I used to wonder what became of you." I almost told her everything about the letters, the dreams, the years of quiet longing. But instead I just said life got away from me. She nodded like she understood. I walked her home that evening. It was a short walk, maybe 10 blocks, but it felt like the longest, most beautiful journey I'd taken in years. At her front steps, she turned to me. "Will you be around?" she asked, "while I'm here?" I wanted to say, "I've always been around, Evelyn, even when you weren't," but again, I stayed silent. "Yeah," I said, "I'll be around." We didn't hug, we didn't make promises, but that night I went home and pulled out all the letters. I read them one by one, tears soaking the edges. Then I tore them up. All of them, not out of anger, but because I realized something. She didn't need my confessions from the past. She was here, now. And maybe, just maybe, I still had time to say the words I never said. We met 3 more times that week. Nothing dramatic, no grand declarations, just walks. Long, quiet walks down streets where the leaves turned red and gold like they were on fire. She'd talk about her patients, mostly elderly, mostly lonely. She said she had learned more about love from holding the hands of dying strangers than from any romance she'd ever lived through. I wanted to tell her that I'd never loved anyone but her, but I didn't. I was afraid, not of rejection, exactly, but of breaking whatever fragile, beautiful thing was forming between us. One afternoon, we sat on a bench in the park near the old bandstand. Evelyn had brought 2 cups of black coffee. I hated black coffee, but I drank it anyway. She looked tired that day. Her eyes had shadows under them, and her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. "I might have to go back sooner than I thought," she said quietly. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "My mom's doing better, but the hospital called. They're short-staffed. It's bad." I nodded. "You're needed." She gave a soft laugh, bitter around the edges. "I don't know about that, but I have bills and they have beds that need turning." There was silence for a while. I looked at her then, really looked. And I saw the girl I used to know wrapped in the woman she had become. Resilient, tired, beautiful. "Evelyn," I began. She turned toward me. But I didn't finish, because her phone rang. She answered with a whisper, a few nods, then hung up. That was the hospital, she said, staring at the screen. They need me tomorrow. A pause. I'm leaving tonight. My chest felt hollow. I'm sorry, she added quickly. I didn't plan this. It's okay, I lied. She looked at me like she knew I was lying. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote this last night, she said. Didn't know if I'd give it to you. She placed it in my hand. Don't open it now. Then she leaned in and kissed my cheek, just a brush, but it burned like fire. I'm glad we ran into each other, she whispered. And then she walked away. I sat there for a long time. Long after the wind picked up, long after the sun dipped below the tree line. Then I unfolded the letter. It was short. Sam, if you had asked me to stay, I would have, but you didn't. Maybe in another life. E. I stared at the words until they blurred. The letter slipped from my fingers, and for the first time in years I cried. Not the quiet kind, not the dignified kind, but the kind that sounds like something breaking open inside you. People talk about heartbreak like it's an explosion. Loud, violent, over in a flash, but they don't tell you about what comes after. The silence, the stillness, the unbearable absence. After Evelyn left, life didn't fall apart. It simply continued, just without color. Like someone turned the saturation down on the world. I went back to work, graded papers, smiled at students, shuffled through lectures and office hours like a man ticking boxes on a form he didn't write. The seasons came and went. So did people. I dated now and then, kind women, brilliant women, but none of them had her laugh. None of them paused after they said good morning like Evelyn did, as if it might be the last time. None of them made silence feel safe. So I never stayed long. When my father died, I sat alone in the church pew with a tie too tight around my neck. Evelyn didn't know, of course. I hadn't written, I didn't call, I couldn't. And when my mother passed 3 years later, I buried her on a Monday in February snow. I remember the wind more than the prayer. At night, sometimes, I would open her letter, the one Evelyn left me. I kept it in a book of poetry by Pablo Neruda, page 42, right next to a line that always felt too accurate. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. I never showed that letter to anyone, but I read it 100 times. Each time a part of me asked, what if I had just asked her to stay? But then I'd close the book and do the dishes and grade the essays and go on breathing. Because that's what you do when you survive the loss of someone still alive. You keep breathing. You learn how to live with the absence like a phantom limb. You pretend not to limp. In 1999, I got promoted to head of the English department. They gave me a plaque, took a photo. I smiled for the camera, then went home and made dinner for one. The next year, I adopted a cat from the shelter, named him Pablo. He sat on the windowsill every morning like he was waiting for something better to arrive. Sometimes I joined him, and still I taught. I taught for 37 years. Every time I watched my students fall in love, with language, with life, with each other, it stirred something raw in me. But I never let them see it. I just encouraged them, told them not to wait, not to assume they had endless time. Some listened. Others would learn the hard way, just like I did. But here's the strange thing about loss. Even when it's quiet, it leaves a sound behind, like the echo of a song you only half remember but still hum on rainy days. That was Evelyn. She was the song I never finished singing. And even now, so many years later, sometimes I still turn my head too quickly in a crowd, thinking I've seen her. Once, about a decade ago, I swear I did. In a train station, of all places, a woman in a green scarf. Same walk, same tilt of the head. I called out, "Evelyn?" She turned. It wasn't her. But for one sharp second, my heart remembered how to beat like it used to. I lived a quiet life, maybe even a good one, but not a full one. Not the way it could have been. It was a Thursday. Funny how moments that change your life don't arrive with thunder. No trumpet, no warning. Just a regular Thursday with burnt toast, lukewarm coffee, and the smell of rain coming through a cracked kitchen window. That's when I heard the mail slot click. Nothing unusual. Bills, a grocery flyer. One envelope, hand-addressed, yellowed with time. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. Until I did. E.M. Calloway, postmarked from Vermont. My hands began to tremble. It had been How many years now? 37. I opened the letter like I was holding breath that hadn't been exhaled in decades. Dear Samuel, I don't know if this will reach you. Maybe you've moved. Maybe you've forgotten me. But I had to write. I've started doing that more lately, writing letters with no promise of response. There's something freeing about saying things, even if they echo into nothing. I sat down, the weight of the letter heavier than the chair beneath me. You were the great what-if of my life. I need you to know that. I married Henry 2 years after I left. He was kind, steady, safe. We built a quiet life in the hills, raised 2 children, buried a dog, argued about wallpaper, laughed more than I thought we would. But I thought of you every autumn, especially in October. There it was, the echo. I always wondered if I should have stayed, if you would have asked. But you didn't, and I didn't. And still you remained with me, in poems and music, in the silence between sentences. I put the letter down and cried, not the bitter sobs of regret, but the hollow, reverent tears that come from reading your own life in someone else's handwriting. She'd remembered. She'd wondered, too. She'd written, if you're reading this and still breathing, then maybe one day we could write back. Or maybe just sit in the same room and not say a word. That would be enough. There was no return address, no phone number. Only her name. The name I'd carried like a closed book in the center of my chest. That night I didn't sleep. I made tea. I listened to our song, the one we never danced to. I opened that Neruda book again. Page 42. The old letter still folded inside. And now, beside it, her new one, decades apart. 2 pieces of paper holding up the walls of my soul. The next morning I called a friend who still had contacts in Vermont. I gave him the name, the town. He promised to ask around. I waited for 3 days. On the 4th he called. She passed last spring, he said softly. But her daughter runs a bookstore on Main Street. Says Evelyn used to talk about you. A lot. I didn't cry this time. I smiled. Because somehow, even from the quiet edges of our lives, we'd reached across time. She'd remembered. I'd never forgotten. And that's how I ended up writing this. Because love, real love, the kind that never quite dies, it deserves to be told. Even if it comes too late. Even if it hurts. Even if it never got its ending. It took me 3 weeks to convince myself. 3 weeks of rereading her letter. Of standing by the window, coat on, then taking it off. Of watching the mailbox, hoping another envelope might come. It didn't, but that silence told me everything I needed to hear. So I packed a small bag, grabbed the worn copy of Neruda, and took the earliest bus to Vermont. The ride was quiet. I stared at the trees outside. October again, her season. The gold and crimson leaves danced beside the highway like confetti sent by ghosts. I arrived in the town of Maple Glen just past noon. It was the kind of town that smelled like cinnamon and old wood, wind chimes on porches, handwritten chalkboard menus outside diners. And there, tucked between a bakery and a flower shop, was Callaway's Books. Small, brick-faced, a faded green awning with white letters curling at the edges, like it had been there forever. I stood outside for a long moment. Then I pushed open the door. It rang softly. The smell hit me first, paper, lavender, and something warm, like comfort itself had a scent. "Hello?" I called gently. A woman appeared from the back, probably in her 30s, glasses perched on her head, hair tied in a loose bun. She looked up and blinked. "Can I help you, sir?" I held the letter out. "She was your mother, wasn't she?" She stared at the envelope, lips parting slightly, then nodded. Yes, she was." I introduced myself. Her eyes welled up before I could finish. "You're Samuel," she whispered. "Yes." She stepped forward and hugged me. Not the awkward hug of strangers, but the long, silent kind, where your body remembers something your mind never knew. "She talked about you." That's all she said, but it was enough to set my heart breaking and healing in the same moment. She invited me to the back room, made tea, brought out an old photo album. There was Evelyn, younger and older, always smiling the same. "She never forgot you," her daughter said. Every fall she'd reread one letter, yours. Said it was her favorite silence. I told her I never stopped writing. in my mind at least. She smiled. Would you like to see where she's buried? I nodded. The cemetery sat on a hill above the town, quiet and tender. A small stone, simple engraving. Evelyn M. Calloway, beloved mother. Quiet soul. October was her favorite color. I knelt, took out the Neruda book. I carried you longer than I carried anything, I whispered. You lived inside every word I never said. I placed the book at the base of her grave. The wind picked up then, rustling the trees, and in that sound I heard her laugh again. On the way back, her daughter handed me a small envelope. I found this among her things, she said. She wrote it a month before she passed, never mailed it. Inside was one line. If we meet again in another life, please ask me to stay. That night I sat alone in a small inn, but I didn't feel lonely. I'd found something I hadn't known I was looking for. Closure, perhaps. Or maybe just proof that even unspoken love leaves echoes. Sometimes we don't get a happy ending, but we can still find peace in the middle of the story. I was supposed to stay in Maple Glen for 2 days. 2 days, but I didn't leave. Not after seeing her grave, not after stepping into her bookstore, not after realizing that even though Evelyn was gone, something of her still lived in every spine, every shelf, every note scribbled in the margins of an old paperback. It felt like coming home to a house I'd never lived in. So when her daughter, Emily, asked if I wanted to help around the store while she took maternity leave, I said yes. I was 78 years old, stiff in the knees, slow with the register, and knew little about shelving systems. But I knew words, and I knew how to listen. The locals came in cautiously at first. I must have looked like some old relic from another age. Tweed coat, leather shoes, my voice a soft whisper among louder lives. But then a boy named Trevor came in, 11, awkward, always looking at his shoes. He picked up a book on Greek mythology. I told him the story of Icarus as I remembered it, not just the fall, but the beauty of the flight. He came back the next day, then again, then he brought his sister, then a teenager named Sasha, who confessed she hadn't read a book since 8th grade but wanted something about grief, then a man who'd lost his wife, then a young couple about to marry. Before long, the bookstore was breathing, not bustling, not noisy, just alive. Emily returned months later with her newborn. I told her I'd be heading back to the city. She looked at me over a cup of coffee and said gently, "You don't have to go. The bookstore's better when you're in it." I stayed, not just because of Evelyn, but because I'd finally realized something. You can love someone your whole life and never stop missing them, but if you don't let that love spill out into others, it turns into regret. I had carried Evelyn in silence for decades. Now I was learning to share her with the world. In every story I recommended, in every child I read to, in every quiet soul that walked through the door unsure of who they were, and left just a little more whole. One evening I took an old leather journal and started writing. Not letters this time, not poems, just truth. I spent a lifetime waiting to speak. Now I hope someone out there hears me, not because I was great, but because I was human. And I tried. I left the journal on a shelf in the back labeled, "For When You Feel Alone." The next morning it was gone. In its place was another one, blank, waiting. They say no one really dies as long as someone remembers them. If that's true, then maybe I've still got time. I sit by the window of the little room above the bookstore now. My knees ache. My hands tremble when I pour tea. The mornings come slower and the nights feel longer, but I am not lonely. Not anymore. Because every morning someone walks through the bookstore door and asks for a story. And sometimes they leave with more than they expected. Sometimes they leave with a piece of me. Emily calls me the old wizard of aisle 3. Trevor visits after school with stories of his first heartbreak. Sasha now runs a book club on Friday nights. The man who lost his wife brings his granddaughter to story hour, and Evelyn's photo sits on the front desk, smiling, soft, almost alive. People ask who she was. I always say, she was the reason I believe in silence, and the reason I learned to speak. Sometimes I wonder what she'd say if she saw me now. Would she laugh at my trembling hands? Would she mock the way I still can't work the coffee machine? Would she see how I've finally learned to live? I like to think she'd say, "It took you long enough, Sam." And I'd reply, "I know, but I got here, didn't I?" Tonight might be my last night. I feel it in my chest, deep, low, steady, like the final page turning. I don't regret the pain, I don't regret the silence. I regret only the delay. But maybe, just maybe, my story will reach someone who needs to hear it. Someone standing in the shadows of their own heart, afraid to speak. So if you're reading this or listening, remember, tell them you love them. Don't wait. Don't assume there's more time. Don't believe silence will protect you. Because love never meant to live in silence. It was made to be said, to be shouted, to be sung. And if I could do it all again, I would have sung her name every single day. This is Samuel Pierce, and if my story ever reaches you, know this: even the quietest love leaves echoes that never die.